Owen Hart fell 78 feet to his death during a comedy stunt on live pay-per-view. He was rigged to a quick release built for a laugh, not for his life, and that single cheap decision turned a superhero gag into the moment his wife and 2 kids lost him forever. What happened in the hours after his fall would prove even harder to forgive than the fall itself. The stunt setup, the rig that killed Owen Hart, was never built to hold him up. It was built to let him go. That distinction is the whole story. And almost nobody watching Over the Edge on May 23, 1999, in Kemper Arena, Kansas City, had any reason to think about it. They were watching a guy in a cape. Owen Hart was booked to face the Godfather for the Intercontinental Championship that night, but the match itself barely matters yet. What matters is how he was supposed to arrive. Owen was playing the Blue Blazer, a masked superhero parody WWF built as a joke at his own expense. A gimmick so deliberately corny it mocked the very idea of a good guy hero. The entrance called for him to be lowered from a catwalk in the rafters, dangling on a cable high above the ring, before dropping the last few feet into a comedy pratfall that would get the crowd laughing before the bell even rang. To pull that off, Owen was fitted with a quick-release harness, engineered so he could pop himself free a short distance above the mat and tumble in like a superhero who couldn't stick the landing. It's a funny idea on paper. A skilled, respected technician, a man other wrestlers trusted to protect them in the ring, reduced to a flying gag because the company needed a laugh before the real wrestling started. Here's what made this particular rig different from every rafters entrance before it. WWF had lowered performers from up there plenty of times. Shawn Michaels had done his own rafters entrance using a setup built around redundancy, multiple points of security designed to keep a body safely in the air until the exact moment it was supposed to come down. Owen's rig for the Blue Blazer used none of that engineering. It relied on a single snap shackle, one release point, 0 backup, nothing to catch him if that one point failed or fired early. Investigators later determined exactly how sensitive that mechanism was, and the number is genuinely hard to sit with. Just a few pounds of pressure could trigger it, not a deliberate pull, not a calculated release. A few pounds, the kind of pressure a shifting body weight or a stray bump could generate completely by accident. Standard climbing gear and professional stunt rigging exist specifically to resist that kind of accidental load. This wasn't that kind of gear, not close. Wrestling historians have gone back over that hardware choice for years, and the consensus lands hard every single time. Choosing a single-point release mechanism with a hair trigger for a stunt happening dozens of feet above a wrestling ring wasn't a rare misstep born out of panic. It was a decision that treated the joke as more important than the man performing it. Nobody made a bad call under pressure that night. The equipment was selected, approved, and rigged that way on purpose, days before Owen ever clipped himself in. Owen wasn't some daredevil chasing a bigger pop. Co-workers described him as the guy who slowed matches down to protect younger talent, who thought the Blue Blazer bit was corny and said so out loud, who wanted to get home to Stephanie and their 2 kids more than he wanted another indignity in a cape. He didn't design this rig, he didn't choose this hardware. He just trusted the people who did, the way performers are supposed to be able to. Every piece of that rig was built to let go easily. That was the entire point of it. And the mechanism holding him 78 feet above the ring only needed a few pounds of pressure to open, long before he was ever meant to detach. The fall, the crowd cheered when Owen Hart hit the ring. That's not a metaphor, and it's not an exaggeration. Real applause, real laughter rippling through Kemper Arena in the 2 or 3 seconds after his body struck the corner post. The gimmick had done its job too well. Blue Blazer was supposed to be goofy, a parody superhero rigged to descend from the rafters and land with some kind of comedic flourish, and the crowd had been trained all night to expect exactly that kind of silliness. Every prior entrance had reinforced the bit, so when the snap shackle released early and Owen started falling for real, nobody in that building processed it as real. They processed it as the bit. That's the whole tragedy in one sentence. The joke was so well built that it briefly outperformed the truth. The rig failure itself took less than a second. As his entrance music hit and Owen stepped off the ledge above the ring to begin his planned descent, the quick release mechanism holding his line opened prematurely and let him go almost instantly. No slow lower, no controlled drop, just immediate freefall from roughly 78 to 80 feet up, more than 7 stories, straight down into a wrestling ring in front of a sold-out crowd and a live pay-per-view audience. There was no window for a save, no time for a spotter to react, no slack to catch, no margin at all between the mechanism failing and Owen hitting canvas. A rig that's supposed to be the safest part of the entire show became the only part of the show that mattered, and it failed in under a second. He came down chest first, striking on or near the top rope in a corner of the ring. The impact was catastrophic. It severed his aorta, the main artery carrying blood out of the heart, and that single injury is close to unsurvivable no matter where it happens or how fast help arrives. Blood filled his chest cavity and lungs within minutes. Medical reconstructions of the fall indicate he lost consciousness essentially the moment he hit the ropes and never regained it. Whatever happened next, Owen Hart was not awake for it. That detail matters, and it's about the only mercy anywhere in this story. Everything after that point was other people's suffering, not his. Fans still argue over the exact mechanics of that impact, whether he hit the ropes first or the mat, whether the fall was closer to 78 feet or a few feet more, because the reports from that night and the retellings since have never lined up perfectly. It is worth being honest that this is thin ground, built on a handful of conflicting eyewitness accounts and shifting numbers, not settled fact. Nobody who was in that arena was studying trajectory angles with a stopwatch and a notepad. They were watching a man they thought was clowning around, mid-costume change, mid-punchline, mid-blue blazer. That confusion is exactly why the numbers still wobble decades later. That's the part that makes this moment so brutal to sit with. A 34-year-old father who never wanted to be a cartoon character in the first place had spent months making this exact costume land as a joke. And the joke worked so well, it delayed his own crowd from realizing he was dying in front of them. The gag wasn't just poorly rigged. It was so convincingly a gag that it bought itself extra seconds of laughter it never should have gotten. Think about how specific that failure is. Most tragedies don't get mistaken for comedy first. Most tragedies at least look like tragedies while they're happening. The crowd didn't know. They kept cheering into the silence that should have replaced it. And that silence took its time arriving because the joke had built up too much momentum to stop on command. But within seconds, the people rushing toward that corner of the ring understood exactly how bad it was. And they were about to be fighting an injury that almost nobody survives. The medical response. Every second of this response went right, and it did not matter at all. That is the brutal math of what happened next. This was not a case of anyone freezing, panicking, or fumbling the moment. WWF staff and on-site medics hit the ring within moments, moving with the kind of urgency you train for and hope you never actually need. The referee was already waving frantically for help before most of the crowd even understood what they were looking at, before the gasp had even finished traveling through the arena. Somewhere between the top of the stunt and the bottom of the fall, the entire building shifted from entertainment mode into emergency mode, all at once, without anyone announcing it, without anyone having time to explain it to the people around them. The broadcast cut away from a direct shot of the ring. That was not an accident, and it was not a technical glitch. It was a small editorial choice, made in real time by someone who understood exactly how bad this was before the audience at home did. Not a mystery, not a coincidence. A decision made in seconds, by a production team that clearly knew this was no longer a show, and that some things are not meant to be broadcast live into people's living rooms. Hart was worked on in the ring for several minutes. Medics surrounded him, doing everything the moment demanded, while thousands of people who had come to watch a hero fly out over the crowd instead watched something go horribly, silently wrong in front of them. Then came the stretcher. Then the long trip out through the same arena he was supposed to be soaring through minutes earlier, laughing, waving, playing the character everyone loved and paid to see. From there, he was rushed to Truman Medical Center in Kansas City, where doctors kept trying. Not for a minute, not for a token effort made so nobody could say they didn't try. They kept trying until 8:12 p.m., when a 34-year-old man, a father, a husband, someone who agreed to this stunt because his kids thought superheroes were cool, was pronounced dead. The cause was not vague. This was not one of those cases wrapped in soft hospital language. No quiet mention of complications doing the heavy lifting for everyone involved. Blunt force trauma to the chest had severed his aorta, and he was bleeding internally at a rate that outpaces almost any hospital on Earth, let alone one racing against the clock from an arena floor in real time, in the middle of a live event. Once that vessel tore, the outcome was not really in question anymore. Everything after that point was effort, not possibility. The doctors were not fighting for a chance. They were fighting anyway. Some fans have spent 25 years asking the same question. Would a faster stretcher have changed it? A closer hospital? A different call made at ringside in those first frantic seconds before anyone fully grasped what they were dealing with? It is a fair question to ask, and it comes from a good place, the kind of place that wants there to have been one moment where this could still have been stopped. It is not, medically, an open one. A severed aorta bleeding out inside the chest cavity is one of the least survivable injuries in trauma medicine. Full stop, no asterisk, no exception waiting to be discovered 25 years later by someone who looks hard enough. And it was already happening before anyone even reached him. The response was not slow. The injury was simply faster. That is the part worth sitting with, because it moves the blame exactly where it belongs. not on a doctor working under impossible pressure with a building full of witnesses, not on a referee doing his job in front of a crowd that had no idea what it was actually watching, not on an ambulance crew racing through a stadium built for cheering, not dying. The moment that Rigg released him 78 feet above the canvas, the outcome was already locked in place. Everything that came after, the medics, the stretcher, the hospital, the doctors who refused to stop until 8:12, was just the world catching up to something that had already been decided in the rafters, long before anyone on the ground even knew what was falling toward them. A man was dead in the building, and yet, out in that same arena, the lights stayed on, the ring got cleared, and a decision was made that would be argued about for the next 25 years, the decision to continue. Somewhere in that arena, a man was already dead, and the show still had a match card to finish. That is not a metaphor. That is literally what happened. Owen Hart fell to his death in front of thousands of people, and within minutes, referees were calling for the bell on the next bout like nothing had happened. The rig failed. The fall was unsurvivable. Now the third failure stacks on top of the first two, and this one is not about equipment. This one is about the response. At home, viewers got the truth immediately. Jim Ross, working commentary that night, told the television audience plainly that Owen Hart had died from the fall. Millions of people sitting on their couches, eating dinner, half paying attention, suddenly knew exactly what they had just watched. Meanwhile, in the building itself, the paying crowd got nothing. No announcement over the arena speakers. No explanation from anyone with a microphone. Just more wrestling, like the show could paper over what had just happened 40 feet in the air. Sit with how insane that split actually is for a second. The people who paid to be there, who filled the seats, who screamed when Owen fell from the rafters, were left completely in the dark, while total strangers on their couches got the full truth from a guy in a headset 300 miles away. Some fans in the arena spent the rest of the night slowly piecing it together, watching empty seats appear near the entrance ramp, feeling a strange, heavy energy settle over the building that nobody would name. Others reportedly did not fully understand what had happened until they got home, turned on the news, and found out their night out had been the night a man died. The show did not pause. It did not go dark, not even for a minute. Matches continued, one after another, on schedule. Wrestlers who had just watched their friend die, or heard about it backstage in real time, were sent back out to perform in front of a crowd that had no idea why the mood behind the curtain had gone completely silent. Somewhere in that building, a widow was learning in real time that she now had 2 kids and no husband, while 40 feet away, the pay-per-view clock kept ticking like it always did. This is the moment the whole pattern stops being deniable. A rig that got buried instead of fixed, a fall with zero margin for error, and now a company that looked at a man's death in front of a live audience and decided the broadcast still mattered more than stopping to say his name out loud. The criticism was immediate, and it was brutal. Media outlets, wrestling insiders, and fans hammered WWF for continuing the show at all, calling it one of the coldest decisions in the history of televised sports and entertainment. Full stop, no qualifiers. The defense, when it eventually came, leaned on crowd control and logistics. Stopping a sold-out arena show mid-broadcast risks panic, and panic in a packed building is its own kind of danger. That argument gets made every time this comes up. It has never fully landed, not with fans, not with critics, not really with anyone. Because here's what WWF did afterward, quietly, with zero press conference attached to it. Over the Edge 1999 has never been re-aired in full under the WWF or WWE banner. Not on a network rerun, not on any streaming library, not anywhere with the company's name officially stamped on it. And the event name itself, Over the Edge, simply stopped existing. No replacement branding announcement, no farewell explanation, just a quiet, permanent retirement, like burying a word so nobody ever has to say it out loud again. You do not retire an entire pay-per-view brand over one bad match or one rough night. Companies bury things when the thing itself has quietly become an admission of guilt. Over the Edge was not a bad event by wrestling standards. It was the night the show mattered more than the man, and it turns out WWF understood that better than anyone watching from home ever could. They just understood it a few years too late, and only after the cameras had already stopped rolling entirely on their own terms. The company treated the show as something that simply had to go on, no matter what. But one person refused to let the story end with a moment of silence, and she was about to force everyone involved to put an exact number on what they had done. The aftermath and lawsuit, $18 million. That's what it cost to make sure this never saw a jury. Not $18 million in prize money, not a business deal, not a bonus for a good year. $18 million, paid out specifically so the WWF would never have to stand in a courtroom and explain why Owen Hart fell 78 feet in front of his family. Martha Hart, along with their 2 children and Owen's parents, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the WWF, the rigging company, and the manufacturers of the harness equipment. The claim was simple: negligent planning, unsafe stunt design, a comedy bit engineered by people who never should have been trusted with a man's life in the first place. The case never got anywhere near a verdict. In November 2000, the McMahon family and the WWF settled out of court, agreeing to pay $18 million to Owen's surviving family. Roughly $10 million went to Martha, $3 million to each of Owen's 2 children, $2 million to his parents. That's not a company writing a check, because it feels generous. Companies do not hand over $18 million because they're confident they'd win a trial. They hand it over because their own lawyers looked at the evidence and told them to run, fast, before a jury ever got a look at it. And the evidence was brutal. Investigations tied to the case confirmed what wrestling fans had suspected since the night it happened. The snap shackle rigged for Owen's descent was not standard fall arrest gear. It wasn't built to hold a human being suspended above a live event. It required only minimal pressure to release, the kind of pressure a body naturally generates just hanging quietly in a harness. The device meant to keep Owen safe was, by design, built to let go, not built to fail eventually, built to fail easily. Remember the promise from earlier, that Owen had done this drop before, that it was supposed to be routine. Now put that next to the shackle findings and watch the whole story change shape. The rig wasn't unlucky. It was engineered wrong from the start, and everyone who signed off on it eventually agreed, quietly, in a settlement room instead of a courtroom, that they couldn't defend that decision in front of 12 strangers in a jury box. Martha Hart never let the story soften. She turned down WWE's offers to include Owen in the Hall of Fame. She refused licensing deals for his likeness. She spent the following decades keeping his memory anchored to what actually happened instead of what the company wanted people to remember. She built the Owen Hart Foundation, funneled money into causes that had nothing to do with wrestling, and stayed publicly, unapologetically critical of how WWE handled his death. While the show moved on to new storylines and new pay-per-views like nothing had happened, she made sure at least one person never let anyone forget that it did. Fans still argue about what the lawsuit actually changed. The strongest version of that argument holds up completely. After Owen's death and the financial reckoning that followed, promotions pulled back hard on high-risk entrance stunts. Rigging got scrutinized in ways it never had before. The era of dropping performers from the rafters for a cheap pop effectively ended that year. Nobody in the industry wanted to write another $18 million check, and nobody wanted to be the next name in a filing like Owen's. That's the part that recontextualizes everything. The falling wasn't a freak accident layered on top of a freak accident. It was a costume built for spectacle, a harness rated for less than it was asked to hold, and a company that valued the pop of the entrance over the person inside the suit. Every piece of that night, the rushed rigging, the untested release, the show that kept rolling with Owen's body still on the arena floor, pointed at the same conclusion the settlement eventually confirmed out loud, just without a judge in the room to hear it. The $18 million was never really a number. It was a verdict nobody had the nerve to read in open court. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.